Now let's take a look at the SonarQube learning repository. I set up the SonarQube learning repository for us to understand how SonarQube works. So once you're in my GitHub, you come to SonarQube learning repo. You come to SonarQube learning repo. Now, once you're in SonarQube learning repo, this repository basically I set it up to give you a more detailed understanding of what SonarQube is. Now, it gives you a basic introduction. SonarQube is an open source platform for continuous code quality and security analysis. So once you set up SonarQube, you actually basically want to do code quality and security analysis. And these are some key features which we are going to see as far as SonarQube is concerned. We have comprehensive code analysis where it detects issues like bugs, vulnerabilities, code smells, and duplications. We also have quality gate where you can enforce some configuration threshold that code must meet before you can actually merge. We have multi-language support. We'll see that it can support languages like Java, Python, JavaScript, C++. Then we equally have security scanning where we can identify security vulnerabilities, technical depth, and a lot more. So these are some key features which SonarQube has. Once you set up a SonarQube server, you can perform comprehensive code analysis. You can perform or you can enable or set up quality gates. You can have support for multiple languages as far as scanning is concerned. You can do security scanning and all that. Now, what are some common use cases of SonarQube? You can use SonarQube for code quality management. You can use SonarQube for security auditing and for technical depth tracking. So when you come to this repository basically gives you a more detailed understanding of what you can use SonarQube for. Now, how do you integrate SonarQube maybe to a CI/CD pipeline? If you set up a CI/CD pipeline with something like Jenkins, now the most important thing is you can enable SonarQube integration with tools like Maven, where in your pom.xml file, remember we have our pom.xml file. If you come back to our practice Maven learning project, which we have been working on for both Maven and SonarQube, and then you open this Java code, you will see the pom.xml file. This pom.xml file is a file which we explain that we can have dependencies, libraries, and all the like. Once you're in your pom.xml file, you can configure the usage of SonarQube here in your pom.xml file. So if you come back to your basically in a repo, this is how you can set it up. You can add SonarQube to your pom.xml file to set up a code to set up SonarQube analysis in the Maven project. So this is basically the code which you can use to set up such analysis in your pom.xml file. Now, equally, you could set up these servers assuming that you have a settings.xml file which you can equally use to perform your code analysis or your code checking. Now, if you come back to our project repository, yes, our setting.xml file, and if you come to our setting.xml file, you will see that we have this given configuration here where we have a configuration to set up the SonarQube given host. Basically, you specifying which server SonarQube runs on. So if you come here, this is where you actually modify the credentials or the settings to match that of your SonarQube server. Now, basically, as far as when you have SonarQube set up, you can then run the Maven deploy command, and with the Maven deploy command, it's basically going to run the same set of tests. We're going to run static code analysis on whatever configuration code which you have. Now, if you were to integrate SonarQube to a CI/CD pipeline like Jenkins, basically you integrate a stage where SonarQube will perform an analysis. Now, this is basically how you set up SonarQube. You use environment variable with SonarQube environment variable where you've installed the SonarQube plugin, and then you run now the SonarQube command mvn sonar. So this is basically how you can integrate SonarQube with Jenkins. You can equally go ahead to perform the same integration with GitHub Actions. Assuming you are setting up CI/CD integration with GitHub Actions, you can set up a SonarQube integration with GitHub Actions where you run this job to perform the same code analysis on your code, as well as GitLab CI and even Microsoft Azure DevOps. So these are some basic examples on how you can integrate SonarQube or static code analysis. Now, for our given use case, this is the implementation which we are going to be doing. we already have implemented in the previous use cases. We've done the Maven stage where we use Maven to perform the build. We've equally stored our artifacts to Nexus. Now we are going to be integrating a stage in between Maven and Nexus repository. Ideally, you need to perform a SonarQube analysis before you can even store such artifacts in a repository manager. So we are going to be setting up SonarQube server that will perform bug checks, perform vulnerability scanning, search for code smells and duplications. Once you set the SonarQube server, the moment you the moment you upload your code to your given Maven server, you will use SonarQube to perform static code analysis, and if the code passes your code analysis, then you can run a Maven deploy to push the code to your repository management with Nexus. So this is basically how Maven, SonarQube, and Nexus work hand in hand, where the developer pushes the code to GitHub, the code is automatically cloned to the Maven server. You run the SonarQube analysis code on the Maven server to check for vulnerabilities on the code base, which has been pushed into the Maven server. And if all vulnerability checks are passed, then you can run a Maven deploy to deploy the code to your Nexus repository. So these are the basic steps on integrating Maven, SonarQube, Nexus with GitHub as far as the build stages are concerned for your Java-based web application. Now, back to our repository, there's some other configuration which you must take note of. In this repository, I equally have the installation setup. So here's an installation setups. We have the Maven installation, which we've already done in our previous module. We equally have Nexus installation, which we've done in our previous module. Now, the most important is for us to install SonarQube installation, which we'll be doing. Now, the most important is for us to install SonarQube. So we'll be doing SonarQube installation. And if you can look at these user data, we are basically using the apt-get. So we are going to be using an Ubuntu image for us to install SonarQube on that server. So we'll be installing SonarQube in an Ubuntu server. And again, you have the setup configuration script for Nexus in this same repository, as well as you have the installation script for Maven, how to install Maven on Amazon Linux 2 instance. So we are going to be going right away to install SonarQube based on this installation. We just copy this user data and then we'll be installing SonarQube on our SonarQube server. So for us to set up the repository, so for us to set up the project environment, this is basically the architecture which we are going to be following. And based on our architecture, we are going to be using the tools Git, GitHub, Maven, SonarQube, Nexus, and of course EC2 instance. So these are the basic configuration commands which you need to configure the various environments. This is how you need to configure your environment. We've already done these steps. We've already created our Maven practice Maven learning repo. We've equally set up our Maven server already, and then we've equally set up our Nexus and connected to our Nexus repository. So what we are going to be doing is for us to set up our Prometheus. Now you should install create an Ubuntu 22.04, not 20.04, 22.04. Use the instance type T2 medium, and then security group port 9000, open to port 9000 and port 22. And then you select your key pair, and you can use the installation script here, the SonarQube installation script, and then you launch the instance. Take note, you should run this on Ubuntu 22.04. So these are the basic configurations which you need to run this given SonarQube project.